Don't worry, Mr. Sims. I look weird, but otherwise I'm real normal. Everything will be cool. Thanks a lot. See you next week.
For years, the world thought it knew the story of Rocky Dennis, the boy whose rare condition and courage inspired millions and even a Hollywood movie. But before her death, his mother Rusty revealed a side of their story that few had ever heard, one that reshaped how people understood Rocky's life and legacy. The silence before the truth. For years, the story of Rocky Dennis was told like a fairy tale. He was the boy who faced a rare bone disease, but never stopped smiling. He became the symbol of courage, the kid who beat the odds, and his life was turned into the Hollywood movie mask. Naturally, it was the perfect story. People loved it because it gave them hope. But what if the story you think you know was only half the truth? The world held on to the happy version because it was easier to believe in. It was cleaner, simpler, and uplifting. TV specials painted Rocky as a miracle child. Magazine stories praised his mother, Rusty, as a fearless woman who gave everything to her son. And when Mask hit theaters in 1985, the legend of Rocky became locked in forever. The world was content with that version because it was inspiring, safe, and easy to share. And what about Rusty? For years, she stayed quiet. She rarely corrected the way Hollywood told her son's story, and she let the myths grow. Maybe she knew people needed a hero, or maybe she just did not want to tear down the hope his story gave to others. To most, she looked like a tough, wild, but loving mom who gave her boy a life that doctors never believed was possible. That was enough for people. However, behind that silence, Rusty carried a much heavier truth. She lived through the nights of pain that were never shown on screen. She knew the moments of chaos and heartbreak that no article ever printed. She was there for the side of Rocky's life that the world never wanted to see, and her silence lasted for decades. She let the clean version take over while the reality stayed hidden. But as she got older, she finally began to speak out. And when she did, her words shocked people who thought they already knew everything about Rocky. And once her truth came out, there was no way to look at Rocky's story the same again. Rocky's early life and diagnosis. Rocky Dennis was born on December 4th, 1961, in California. At first, he looked like any other healthy baby. He weighed a normal 7 pounds. His mother, Rusty, was overjoyed, and nothing about his appearance hinted at the struggle that would later define his life. In those first couple of years, Rusty treated him just like any other little boy. She dressed him up, took him outside to play, and enjoyed the laughter of a child who had no idea what was ahead. Things began to change when Rocky was around 2 years old. He kept getting ear infections and sinus problems, the kind of things that most parents deal with and don't think twice about. But with Rocky, these infections kept coming back. Rusty grew worried and finally took him for more serious testing at UCLA. That decision would change everything. Doctors ordered X-rays, and what they saw shocked them. Rocky's skull looked very unusual. Instead of growing normally, his bones were showing strange thickening. After more tests, the doctors gave Rusty a name that would haunt her forever: craniodiaphyseal dysplasia.
They had him in the hospital for about 3 weeks, and at the end of that time, they made a determination. And what they said was it was a very rare disease. There were only 7 in medical history.
It was such a rare condition that almost nobody had even heard of it. Some doctors called it Lionitis because of the way the skull would grow larger and distort the face. This disorder caused calcium to build up in his bones, and over time, the skull would grow heavier and thicker, pressing on the brain and nerves. The side effects were devastating. Doctors explained that Rocky would likely lose his eyesight, then his hearing, and eventually his brain would be crushed by the very bones meant to protect it. Rusty sat there listening to this, and all she could think about was that her little boy had just learned to laugh, to run, to play. Yet there were medical experts telling her that he probably would not live to see his 7th birthday. They weren't talking about school, friends, or about the future. They were talking about preparing for his funeral. Imagine being a young mother and hearing that. It was like a death sentence for a child who was still learning his ABCs. Most parents plan for milestones like teaching their child how to ride a bike or helping them with homework. Rusty was being told to plan for the day she would bury her son. But Rusty wasn't the type to give in easily. The doctors might have written Rocky's future in stone, but she refused to let those words control how they lived. She didn't know how long he had, but she was determined that his short life wouldn't be filled only with hospitals and sadness. She was going to fight for him to have as normal a childhood as possible. A childhood under siege. While other kids were learning how to blend in at school, Rocky never had that choice. His condition drew attention everywhere he went. Children, without meaning harm, often stared and some laughed. Adults, who should have known better, whispered as he walked by. For Rocky, daily life was less about hiding from pain and more about facing it head-on. School, in particular, was like a battlefield. When Rocky first stepped into a classroom, his classmates were unsure of what to make of him. Some avoided sitting near him, and others were bold enough to tease. The cruel words stung, but Rocky had a sharp wit and a sense of humor that often caught bullies off guard. But even with humor, school wasn't easy. Rocky's condition affected his vision, which meant reading and writing came with extra struggles. Still, he refused to quit. He asked questions, participated, and often impressed teachers with how much he knew. Rusty, his mom, was always right behind him, making sure teachers treated him fairly. She wanted him to experience a normal childhood, not one defined by pity. Outside of school, life had its bright spots. Rocky loved riding bikes, hanging out with friends, and playing games like any other boy his age. His unusual appearance didn't stop him from chasing adventures. If anything, he developed a boldness that many kids his age lacked. He had a fearless streak, one that pushed him to try things others wouldn't. That courage often drew genuine friends his way, kids who saw past his face and into his personality. Still, Rocky knew loneliness. There were birthday parties he wasn't invited to and playground cliques that shut him out. He saw how easily other kids made friends without having to explain themselves, and that sometimes hurt the most. At home, though, Rusty worked hard to remind him he was loved beyond measure. She filled their house with laughter, music, and a sense of normalcy, making sure Rocky never felt like he was living on borrowed time. Rocky's humor and resilience. If there was one thing that set Rocky apart, it was the way he handled the rare condition that plagued him. Rocky had a humor that could light up even the darkest room. Instead of letting his face become the reason people pulled away, he often used it as the opening line for his jokes. He knew people were curious, so he would break the tension with quick one-liners that made everyone laugh. That kind of humor was as much a way to make others comfortable as it was his survival tool. Rocky understood that laughter gave him power, so when classmates or strangers didn't know what to say, his jokes disarmed them. Suddenly, the boy they thought was different became the boy who could make them laugh until their stomachs hurt. But humor wasn't all Rocky had. Behind the jokes was a resilience that amazed everyone who knew him. Doctors had predicted he wouldn't live past 7, yet as the years went by, Rocky kept proving them wrong and making every birthday a small victory. Rusty often said that her son had more courage than most adults she knew. He wasn't scared to try new things or meet new people. Even when he faced setbacks, like struggles in school or being left out, he bounced back quicker than anyone expected. That strength inspired his teachers, classmates, and even complete strangers who crossed his path. A chaotic but loving household. Like his school life, Rocky's home life was anything but ordinary. His mother, Rusty, was the heart of the household, and she wasn't the type to quietly accept what doctors or neighbors said. If someone doubted Rocky, Rusty fired back with the kind of confidence that made people think twice. But with that fire also came chaos. Rusty was known for living a fast, colorful life. She had friends coming in and out of the house, music blasting at odd hours, and a free-spirited approach to parenting that didn't always match what people thought a good mother should look like. Some neighbors judged her for it. Teachers and social workers sometimes questioned whether her home was stable enough. Still, through the noise and the whirlwind, there was one thing nobody could deny. Rusty loved her son with every fiber of her being. She might not have followed every rule in the parenting handbook, but she gave Rocky what he needed most, including unconditional love and the courage to live freely. In her eyes, Rocky wasn't fragile. He wasn't someone to be pitied. He was a kid who deserved to laugh, explore, and grow up feeling strong, even if his life would be shorter than most. The rapid decline. For years, Rocky defied the odds. Every birthday felt like a miracle, and each new school year was proof that he was stronger than the doctors had ever imagined. But by his late teens, the effects of his condition began to catch up with him. The decline wasn't immediate, but once it started, it moved faster than anyone wanted to admit. His vision, already fragile, dimmed even further. What used to be simple tasks, like reading or moving around the house, grew more difficult. The sharp, pounding headaches came more often, sometimes leaving him curled up in bed instead of joking with friends. Fatigue became a constant shadow, and Rocky, who had once seemed to draw endless energy from laughter and conversation, now needed more quiet moments just to make it through the day. Teachers probably noticed he wasn't as quick to raise his hand in class. Friends saw him step back during games or social activities. Though he still cracked jokes, they came less frequently, almost as though he was saving his strength for the moments that mattered most. Rocky's resilience was still there, but it flickered like a candle fighting against the wind. Behind his humor was pain he didn't always share.
And one of the doctors had a very keen eye. He seen what looked like some kind of an abnormality in his skull.
Doctors had long warned that the thickening of his skull would eventually overwhelm his body, and little by little, their prediction came to pass. The boy who had once stunned the medical world with his defiance was finally facing a reality he couldn't outrun. Rusty near the end. As Rocky's health slipped, Rusty faced the hardest role of her life, watching her son fade while trying to protect his spirit. For years, she had been the fighter who stormed into schools and hospitals, demanding that Rocky be given every chance. But near the end, her battle wasn't with doctors or outsiders, but with the truth she couldn't change. Rusty knew what was happening long before anyone said it aloud. She saw the way Rocky needed more rest, the way his laughter came in shorter bursts, the way he sometimes withdrew into silence. Yet instead of letting sorrow take over, she made a choice. If Rocky's time was limited, she would make sure those final days felt as full as possible. She kept the house alive with sound and warmth. Friends still dropped by, music still played, and laughter still echoed through their home. Rusty refused to let their world be defined by pity. To her, Rocky didn't deserve a slow fade into sadness. He deserved to feel loved, celebrated and surrounded by the life he had fought so hard to live. For Rusty, every small act mattered. Cooking his favorite meals, keeping his posters on the wall, even making sure the house felt busy instead of quiet. These were her ways of saying, "You are not alone, and your life matters until the very last breath." When Rocky passed in 1978 at only 16, Rusty's world shattered. But even in her grief, she clung to her role as his voice. She told stories, shared his humor, and kept his name alive long after the headlines picked up and faded. Hollywood's mask. When Rocky's story reached Hollywood, it became something bigger than his small California town. In 1985, Universal Pictures released Mask, a film inspired by Rocky's life. For the first time, millions of people who had never heard of craniofacial dysplasia were suddenly introduced to a boy who had faced life with humor, courage, and love.
Do I look like a freak to you?
No.
You know, you've always been real big on telling me that my face doesn't matter, but it does, doesn't it?
The movie starred Eric Stoltz as Rocky and Cher as Rusty, his mother. Cher threw herself into the role with passion, showing a mother's fierce love and chaotic lifestyle with raw honesty. For many viewers, it was the first time they saw a Hollywood movie that treated someone with a rare condition not as a side character, but as the heart of the story. But Hollywood being Hollywood, there were changes. The film softened some details of Rocky's real life and dramatized others. His humor, resilience, and a bond with his mom were all there. But the chaotic, messy parts of Rusty's life were either toned down or changed to fit a neater Hollywood narrative. Still, the movie struck a chord. Critics praised it, audiences wept, and Rocky's story suddenly became known around the world. People who might have otherwise never heard his name walked away inspired by the idea that strength comes in many forms. The movie put his story on the big screen, but it did more than that. It cemented his place as a symbol of courage. Cher even won the Best Actress award at Cannes for her role as Rusty. The film picked up an Academy Award for Best Makeup, proving how much effort went into recreating Rocky's appearance with care and respect. Yet for Rusty, who lived the real story, there was always the sense that no movie could fully capture the boy she raised. The growing myth. After Rocky's passing, something remarkable happened. His story didn't fade away like so many others. Instead, it started to grow, almost like a legend. People who had never met him began to talk about him as if they had known him. His courage, humor, and his ability to defy every expectation slowly transformed him from just a boy with a rare condition into a symbol of strength itself. Part of this came from the movie Mask. Once Hollywood put his story on screen, Rocky was no longer just Rusty's son or a kid from California. He became a face for tenacity. People walked out of theaters quoting his jokes, crying over his struggles, and feeling inspired by the way he lived. Over time, the line between the real Rocky and the Hollywood version blurred, giving rise to a myth larger than life. The myth painted him as a perfect hero, almost untouchable. But the truth was more human. Rocky had fears, frustrations, and tough days just like anyone else. Yet those real messy parts often got left out of the story. People preferred to remember him as the boy who laughed in the face of pain, the boy who beat the doctor's timeline, the boy who reminded everyone that life wasn't about how long you lived, but how well you lived it. Rusty herself both welcomed and struggled with this myth. On one hand, she was proud her son's story continued to inspire so many. On the other hand, she knew that behind the myth was a boy who was real, with quirks only she could fully describe. Yet, that's how myths work. They grow from truth, but they expand into something that belongs to everyone. The reveal. For years, the story of Rocky Dennis was defined by the film Mask. Hollywood gave the world a softened version of his life, one that emphasized triumph, humor, and a perfect ending where mother and son shared his final moments together. But the truth, as Rusty later made clear, was not nearly so neat. Rocky did not die in his mother's arms, as the movie portrayed. In reality, Rusty was not present at the very moment her son passed away. Legal troubles had pulled her away, and the devastating news came not through a bedside farewell, but through a phone call. For a woman who had fought every day of Rocky's life to be his shield, that absence became one of the hardest truths she carried. And Rocky's story after death was also very different from the screen version. He was not laid to rest in a flower-filled cemetery surrounded by tokens of childhood. Instead, his remains were donated to science. UCLA researchers studied his condition to better understand craniodiaphyseal dysplasia. His preserved remains, scans, and medical records became vital material for future doctors and researchers. For years, his case was referenced in classrooms and medical journals, ensuring that his short life left behind knowledge that could help others. This part of Rocky's legacy is rarely spoken about, overshadowed by the Hollywood narrative of bravery and triumph. Yet it reveals something different, that his story did not end with a funeral scene, but instead continued in laboratories and lecture halls, giving him a place in the advancement of medical science. Rusty's revelations peeled back the myth. Rocky was not a flawless miracle child, but a real teenager. One who carried pain, wrestled with contradictions, and left behind a legacy far richer and more complicated than Hollywood ever showed. What do you think matters more, the myth that inspired millions, or the raw truth his mother left behind? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you enjoyed this video, click on the next video on your screen.